The sun had not long risen over the Bosphorus, but the sweat was already dripping down the back of the knights' necks as they stood on the shore, burdened by the weight of their chainmail and armour, broadswords at their sides. Their horses jostled behind them, pulling on the ropes, their coats glistening as they waited to be loaded onto the transports. Achille went to inspect the ships and watched as hundreds of Venetian mariners scurried back and forward, loading the final supplies on the 50 war galleys that stretched along the Galata shore, facing towards the northwestern corner of the city. They carried rocks for the mangonels, barrels carefully loaded with sheaves of arrows to supply the archers, boxes of bolts for the crossbows, and containers of fresh water. As Achille walked along the shoreline, he slowed down as he saw a soldier with one of the abbots, who was hastily scribbling on a parchment. "And to my son Philippe, I leave my estate, provided he accepts the lifelong right of my wife Marguerite to occupy the same." "I have it," said the abbot, as he passed the parchment, and he called to the man. "You wrote everything just as I said?" asked the soldier, unable to read himself. Yes. You just need to sign here, and I will be your witness. I will ensure this gets to your family, if necessary. They will be comforted by knowing that your redemption into heaven is guaranteed, as our cause is just." "Is it?" he asked almost dismissively, as he took the quill and scratched his mark on the bottom of the parchment. Achille wondered the same. He knew that Costello would send another letter to the Pope after receiving Achille's most recent report, which was bound to result in a renewed decree of excommunication. He hadn't given much thought to his own afterlife. He and his mother had never been much for religion, but he had thought about the riches that were behind the walls of the city. He did not want to wait for her death to obtain his own redemption. This was his chance to change his life forever, to be his own man, beholden to no one. "Now go see Father Rossini, who will hear your confession," said the abbot. "Thank you, brother," said the soldier as he walked over to the waiting queue. Achille stopped and thought for a moment that he should join the queue. Better to be safe. Then he thought about what he would tell the priest and decided it was safer to pass by. As Achille walked back towards the Doge's tent, he looked up and saw a flock of birds flying into the northerly wind. He stopped, admiring the beauty of their formation, how they flew in perfect harmony, each instinctively understanding what they were supposed to do as the flock twisted and turned and then dived toward the water. He held up his hand against the glare. The sun was getting higher, and the heat of the day would soon be upon them. At least the breeze would provide some relief. "Doge, the winds are building." Dandolo nodded his head. "Thank you, Achille. Are the men ready?" "Soon."
Paul, welcome to Reading for All.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Can you tell us where the idea was formatted? When did it come to you?
So it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So a trip to Venice to go to the Biennale. So when you go there, it's fantastic artwork you see, but you can also go to the Arsenale, and the Arsenale is the old shipbuilding area. So it's on the eastern part of Venice, and you go there and you have all the art exhibitions all in the old buildings. In the old buildings, there's where the rope was made, where the masts were made, the wood cutting, and all those specialist skills that they had back there. But you then transport yourself back 1,000 years when this started, and my book goes back 800 years. So by then it had been pretty well developed. So 800 years ago, it was really the first industrial assembly line. And part of this story will take you through how it operated and the mechanics of it. So finding the research out, firstly actually seeing it, being blown away and not really having seen it before. Then investigating the story behind it really just dragged me in. And then once I started investigating the story and how important it was to the development of Venice, then going to the Doge Palace, doing the usual things you do in Venice, doing the secret tours where you go into the dungeons and all that sort of thing, which is a lot of fun. Discovered the unique character of Enrico Dandolo, who was the Doge at the time. So he's the Venetian Crusader, and he's the most amazing character in history, or I found. So this is somebody who's 90 years old, he's blind, he's the Doge of Venice, so the head of Venice, which has a very complicated political system that'll take me hours to explain. And he then negotiates with some crusaders to supply ships, so about 200 of them. So they're built in this arsenale. 200 ships in a year on an assembly line. They just move from one part of the port to the other, with thousands of people working on it. But how does that happen? How does somebody 800 years ago, who's 90 years old and blind, one, get elected Doge? He got elected when he was in his late 80s. And then two, not only manipulates the Crusaders to his will, but he ends up leading the crusade.
When you were researching him, were there leaders in our everyday life that came to your mind? Did you think at different times, oh, this is like good old Joey Biden here?
Well, when I was writing it, Trump was in power.
Oh, geez.
So I sort of thought, so you naturally compare.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other things going on at that time in the emperors in Constantinople who seem to be murdering each other all the time to get power or blinding each other. There's what's going on in Germany. There's the Moors being pushed out of southern Spain. So there's a lot going on. There's Genghis Khan over in getting the Mongol tribes together and reinvigorating the Silk Road for trade. And then you've got Constantinople, which is the city in the world at the time. The city of culture, the city of wealth. And so all this was going on at the time. And you see all these characters, and then you naturally try to compare to today. And even sort of the techniques that we used back then, the techniques that the disinformation, the way the election process happens, all those sorts of things you can see now, but in a medieval context. But it's the same issues. It's all about trade wars. It's all about economic power. And you think back then it was pretty primitive. It really wasn't.
Of course. Hey, so we've got this gorgeous prop here. Can you tell us a little about this? When we're talking about the people that make up.
So the Venetian Crusader, his name is...
I'm just going to hold that up so we can all see.
Enrico Dandolo. This is his direct descendant, Andrea Dandolo, who coincidentally we caught up with, who's holding my book.
Do we see that? Yeah. It's no coincidence this picture is with us tonight.
He's staged it perfectly. He's got the cravat with the matching colour. He's done the works and beautifully painting behind. He's obviously spent a little bit of time doing that.
Yeah.
So the story behind how I tracked him down, pure coincidence. So my brother who lives in Milan, who does computer animation and visuals for music, so backgrounds for operas and things like that. He's on a train from Venice to Verona to go to the next gig, and he's sitting there with the composer of their musical event. So the composer's sitting there, they're chatting, they're talking about their family. He said, oh yeah, tell us about your family. He said, oh yeah, my brother, he's written a book. Oh, that's interesting, what's it about? So he gets in to talk about the book. And he said, he's my publisher. The direct descendant of your main character is my publisher. I'm going to get him on the phone. So he rings him immediately. He said, some guy in Australia's just written a book about your family. He said, really?
Fantastic.
And what I found out, because when you're doing a book on a particular era, you want to make sure nobody else has written something too close.
Yeah,
you can do the research, you can do that in English. It's not so easy doing it in another language. So he said, oh, this is fantastic, because there's been so many history books written that include him, but nobody's written a novel. He says, I'm going to buy it straight away. So he immediately goes out and gets it. Goes out online at that stage because it was COVID. He goes online, orders it, and I email him and tell him. He says, I'm just so excited about it. And I said, when it arrives, can you give me a photo of you holding the book? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So there it is.
How fantastic is that? It's so great.